Hey everyone, it's me, Donovan from Serverless Solutions, and today we're going to be doing a little bit different format for our video. I'm going to be having on my friend and coworker, Sergio, who brings a wealth of expertise in working with the Azure platform. He's worked for Microsoft, and now he works for Serverless Solutions, where he helps our clients and me deliver successful solutions on the Azure platform. With that being said, let's get right into it.
I wanted to get started out by kind of asking the question, does Copilot Studio kind of suck? And I think the answer depends on what you're doing with it, right? So we made some previous videos that made Copilot Studio seem kind of fun to work with, where we were integrating with SharePoint, grabbing documents, asking questions that were related to hiring and HR. And while we were able to produce a nice demo and go through, hey, how do I look through the logs to see what's happening? They quickly broke down because it had a very high rate of failure, which we could see through the logs was saying like, hey, due to high content moderation, I'm not able to produce a result for that. And I tried lowering the content moderation all the way to low, and it would still come up and say like, no, I can't do it. And so sometimes I would get answers, but my failure rate was probably in the 60 to 70+% range, which became really frustrating. And I think that you said that you thought you had some ideas around why that might be occurring, especially for our particular use case. And I was wondering if you could talk us through what might be causing that and why we might be running into those particular problems with Copilot Studio and SharePoint.
Sure. I think a little bit of this is probably bad luck around the particular use case that we're exploring. So we're exploring really in its essence, human resources data, what could be looked at as personal data. And so in an enterprise context, we need to step back a little bit and understand sort of what is going on with Copilot itself. So Copilot is, as you've looked at and discussed in previous conversations in this series, a combination of the capabilities of a large language model, but it also is augmenting that large language model with data from our organization. And the way that it is doing that is via Microsoft Graph. And if that's all that was happening, then I don't think we'd be having this conversation, because you would be having interactions saying, great, I want you to go find these elements of the data that we're finding in these resumes. I want you then to summarize that using your large language model, and away we go. But that's not where things stop. There is also the content moderation features that you've talked about. And in Copilot Studio, you do have some influence over content moderation, but it pretty much boils down to low, medium, and high as far as what you can set. And so as we're having these interactions, yes, it is absolutely capable of combing through the resumes that you stored using Microsoft Graph Search to do so. But when you are trying to ask questions that are then being, sent to the large language model, there is an aspect of content moderation that's trying to enforce some reasonable boundaries around personal information. And in the experiments that you and I have been through, I think we've seen over and over again that if we don't ask the question in just the right way, we end up getting blocked by that content moderation layer, because presumably the assumption is that we are trying to look for or interact with data that maybe we shouldn't be.
Right.
So as far as what your options are, you took option number one, which was to manipulate how much content moderation is taking place. And really within Copilot Studio, option number two, if you go through and look at the documentation, is essentially to raise a support ticket, because, as with all of these tools, especially in no code, low code, where we gain in convenience and efficiency, we're always giving up some customizability and control in exchange for that. And so pretty quickly, the exit ramp then becomes, well, if the out-of-the-box tools aren't working, then this needs to become a support case where we can explore this further.
Yeah, we kind of had a joke where if we had somehow encoded these resumes to be recipes,
That's right.
and we said, hey, give me some pizza for tonight, it would totally work. And so what I wanted to do, just as kind of a funny thing, is actually do that and actually make sure that it is that content moderation that's having a problem that it wouldn't be having it with another subject matter. So what I did was I actually spun up another SharePoint site based on recipes, and let's see what the results were.
Hi, everyone. This is Donovan from Post. The Force was not with us during our Teams call, so I'm going to go ahead and give you that demo now. Here I am in our Copilot Studio with Grand Moff Tarkin, and I'm going to ask for a fancy breakfast recipe. We've got a wonderful fancy breakfast, a recipe for French toast with berry compote. Compote? I'm not that fancy. Anyways, back to the recording.
So I just want to do that. I thought it was a fun little demo to go through and try out that assumption that we were making and see that it proved true.
Yeah, and it's not too surprising because the kind of approach that you took, where essentially we take all of the candidates, and instead of asking about their skill sets or other things that could be rendered as human resources data or data that requires moderation, we instead substituted out for a different context and said, okay, well, instead of candidates, let's talk about ingredients, let's talk about recipes. And this is a kind of approach that that a number of attacks on large language models have taken before, where folks are interacting with large language models that are available on the internet and are hitting similar restrictions for content. What we have found over and over again is that if you can reframe the question in a way that the content moderation is not tuned for, then you can a lot of times get the answer that you're trying to get. And so instead of Java programming skills or C# or infrastructure, if we're instead talking about things like pizza ingredients, pepperonis, pineapple, cheese, then the moderation filters that are in place don't seem to have any problem with talking about food. So yeah, we get better results. Now, obviously, I mean, that's interesting in exploring and understanding why we're hitting this issue. But in a enterprise setting, actually asking everybody to reframe their questions of topics that we can discuss, it isn't practical. But it does give us some insight, and that experiment does help validate that it's very likely that what we saw in the diagnostic logs, which was reported as content moderation filtering, does indeed seem to be the issue that we're coming up across here. And so we've got this case where we have a tool that has allowed us to iterate very quickly to get to the point of having an interaction. But now we're going to have to step back again and try to understand, well, if we're having an interaction around a topic that might be considered sensitive in an enterprise context, what can we do?
Right. And I think this was something that I noticed was that, okay, Copilot Studio is doing a great job at getting me a prototype, getting me up and running, getting me showing my stakeholders what the value of an AI chat experience can be based on data they already have. But when it comes time to deliver a fully featured solution, that seems like it's going to take a lot more work, right? And it may include other components. When we're talking about adopting generative AI as part of our strategy, it seems like just slap it in Copilot Studio is probably not the answer, right? So I was wondering if you could kind of help contextualize for our viewers, like if they're thinking about strategy, if they're thinking about adopting AI into their workflows, where should they be thinking about plugging this in, and how can they be successful beyond the demo?
I think what's important to remember is that when we talk about Copilot, like so many other parts of the Microsoft ecosystem, we're really talking about a brand or an umbrella of technologies. And so Copilot Studio definitely has a place in, as a tool in the tool belt. And as you alluded to in the beginning of our conversation, you may run into some challenges if it's the only tool that you know how to work with. But understanding what it can do and what its strengths are, and where you then have to augment that with other tools, can really help when you're putting together a full-blown solution. And to be fair, there are many use cases where Copilot Studio may be appropriate and take you all the way to completion without ever hitting an issue like this. But depending on the use case, depending on the topic, this is just the reality of working with any kind of solution that integrates large language models, at least as things are today. where we are putting these safeguards in place so that as we're all learning how to interact with and get value from these models, we're doing so in a way that's not generating other problems. And so I'd like to go ahead and share on my side as well. When I talk about, Copilot as a brand and really contextualizing what this is, Alex Pierce has put together a visualization that's been picked up and recreated in many contexts. And this is what is affectionately referred to as the Copilot cheese wheel. And yeah, it is a great name. That's exactly what it looks like. And what you see in this is you see a representation, if you kind of go from the center of this visualization and then outwards, of everywhere that Copilot, the brand, is finding its way into the Microsoft ecosystem. And in particular, when we are talking about Copilot Studio, if we look at the developer experiences that are available, we see that Copilot in different forms is finding its way into things like Power Pages, Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, really the whole Power Platform, including Copilot Studio. And so having access to that tool set within Copilot Studio is what allowed us to get up to speed so quickly. But as we start to figure out, as we build out this complete solution, we don't want to forget that when we kind of zoom out a little bit, we have many, many, many more places to consider where we can also take advantage of some of the features that we're trying to put in place with large language models in the context of a Microsoft-based solution. And so, for instance, if you kind of walk directly across the wheel, all the way over to the other side, you start to see that on the one extreme we have Copilot Studio, which is an adaptation of a no-code, low-code approach, and on the left-hand side we come all the way over to the Azure OpenAI service, where we'd be able to interact with that large language model directly. And Microsoft has also released several other models as time has gone on as well. But if we find ourselves in a situation where we need more control or we need to lean in a little deeper for a use case, then being familiar with all of the places and all of the ways that Copilot is available could be advantageous. That's just a brief visualization to understand that when we say Copilot, if you really take the widest view here, and this view is expanding all of the time, Copilot is found its way into nearly all of the major experiences that we have to take advantage of in the ecosystem of solutions that are at our disposal as we're trying to solve problems with this tool set.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's pretty cool to get that high-level view of how Copilot integrates with all of these different products, right? Because I think it can be a bit confusing when we talk about Copilot, because someone may be talking about GitHub Copilot. Another person may be thinking Copilot in Microsoft 365.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else is thinking Copilot Studio. And then someone else may be building their own AI services off of Azure's AI services and Azure AI Search, and then plugging that into either Copilot Studio or another bot experience. And so I think that when we say Copilot, we probably, unless we're talking about Copilot, like you said, the brand, need to be specific about what exactly we're talking about, because it seems like it's available in so many different places and the implications and the use cases are different in each of those.
They definitely are. Copilot in one sense is bringing the power, as we've used, of a large language model to provide a natural language interface on top of our application. So whether we're getting answers or not, we're able to ask our questions using natural language and get natural language responses. We're also taking advantage of summarization, which is one of the strengths of large language models as well. So we have a repository of resumes, and in situations that we ourselves have dealt with, there can be hundreds of resumes and hundreds of data points to comb through. And we see the benefit of it. We see the benefit of using something like a large language model approach to getting insights from that data quickly and finding the candidates that we need, for a given solution efficiently. And
Right.
so all of those advantages are there. But as you've said, Copilot is not only a way to integrate large language models, but in other contexts, Copilot might be a way to use a product more easily. So, for instance, you might be in Office and you might be generating content or telling Copilot to help you build a slide or a table. So Copilot also has a notion of not just the traditional large language model aspects, but also then connecting to and automating aspects of an application as well. And so you're absolutely right to say that context matters. And with regards to Copilot Studio, one of the nice things as well is that as we encounter some of the boundaries of the current state of technology, the more that we understand the umbrella of everything that Copilot is across all of the solutions, the more options we have to not have to simply abandon ship and jump over to a totally different way of doing things. Because Copilot itself, if you remember, Copilot Studio was really the evolution of Power Virtual Agents, previously that portion of Power Platform. And so one of the nice parts as well is we can push the built-in capabilities of using large language models as far as they will go within Copilot Studio, right? The sort of on the rails experience that we've
Right.
been using. But because this is really the evolution of Power Virtual Agents, which has all of the capabilities of the Power Platform built into it as well, if we find that we need to extend this differently or interact directly with something like Azure OpenAI for a particular use case where we need more control, we can introduce that. So it brings a little more complexity to our solution, but we're still able to do that within that tool set if we'd like to. But if we don't have that broader view and understand how these tools come together, then we may not even know that that's an option. So that's something that's important to keep in mind is that, yes, Copilot Studio can provide the benefits of a no-code, low-code development environment that allows you to sort of introduce large language model functionality into your solution, but not to forget that they also are extensible. And Copilot Studio can be used with other solutions if you're aware of them.
Yeah. I think that's really cool because with Power Platform, you've got thousands of connectors to different things within SharePoint. If you want to update your SharePoint lists, if you want to integrate with ServiceNow and countless other integrations that you can handle without doing a bunch of code work. And then if you end up with a use case, like you said, where you need more control, then your developers can focus on that value add while your citizen developers, I think is what you were alluding to, can work in that Power Platform, bring in that augmented model that your engineers are working on and still have a lot of productivity. Does that sound correct?
It does. And I think when we look at enterprise scale development and sort of larger solutions, things that go just beyond demos, that's what we see. We see a blending of those two worlds. Solving the problem over and over again of deploying applications with common user interfaces or deploying mobile applications. That's something that Power Platform does a really good job of, regardless of the experience, be it now Copilot Studio or Power Apps or Power Pages. And so we're able to take advantage of that, but we are still able to partner with sort of our professional developers who are working on more custom solutions to then address some of the challenges like what we've seen here today. And what I've loved about the example that you chose and that we've really been working through is that we've kind of been through that roller coaster, right? We've been through that, the oohs and ahs as as we saw the initial results and we saw just how easy it is, and it is easy to get started. And then we've had to then go through that process of saying, oh, well, now we're starting to hit some of the limitations or, some of the places where we don't have enough control, perhaps, for our use case. And so how do we then work through that? And how do we know what's going on, which is what you've explored previously? And then now what do we do with it now that we know what's going on? And so that's all part of the power of this story as well, is that, it's not just about, yes, can it do a lot of the demo cases that we see, but can it really take on some of the real challenges that we see and that our customers face? And the answer is yes, but the answer is yes if you take that broader view that you've suggested, become aware of where this solution fits in the broader landscape of all the tools that are available to us, so that we can bring to bear the right tool at the right time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And lest folks think that we're proposing something and promising that it would work without it actually working, I actually did take the liberty to go ahead and spin up a large language model in Azure OpenAI. And we're going to see how the conversation changes in that. So, spoiler alert, we're going to have some videos about setting up that. Also, as Sergio mentioned and alluded to, it is stupid easy to deploy Copilot Studio to something like Teams. So I think we've got a lot of things to learn and a lot of things to collaborate on. But yeah, I wanted to jump in and go ahead and show you guys that if you do have more control, you can get the results you're expecting from your language model. All right, so here I am in Azure OpenAI Studio, which is part of that big cheese wheel that we're talking about. And there's a way that you can deploy this to Copilot Studio. I won't be going over that right now, but I will be going over showing you the results you can get if you've got a little bit more control. One of the tricky things about Copilot Studio is I might ask a question like, who knows Python? And it might give me one person, right? But let's see how we do with our customized model. So here we've got actually all the resumes that do actually have Python in them. And this is something I noticed because I've done some local LLM work with LangChain and some open source models. I've even plugged into OpenAI and Azure OpenAI locally and gotten really good results off of creating vectorized index on my own data, right? Using Chroma and stuff like that. And so that's where I started to question, hey, what's going on with Copilot Studio? Why is it not doing what I can do locally? And the answer is I had a lot more control locally. And this solution in Azure OpenAI AI Studio returns that control to me as the engineer. And so it's coming up here with references, but it even does a great job at understanding something I want, like which candidate has the most experience. And we've got an answer back. It's challenging to determine the most experience without clear metrics for comparison, such as years of experience or depth. However, I can provide a summary of each candidate's experience as described in their documents. So it's doing its best to help me and also give me some more information that I might use in a further query to better refine what it's looking for. And so this is that conversational model that I'm really looking for. And that's definitely possible within this Copilot umbrella. And then we can then deploy this to Copilot Studio, like I said previously, and we'll get into that in a future video. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sergio, for sharing with us today and helping us get a better understanding of Copilot as a whole, how it fits into our organization, and how we can be successful. Viewers, I hope that you enjoyed this video as well, and we look forward to sharing even more with you about the overall Copilot umbrella in the future.